Perfect.
Okay, quickly dive into it. Sorry for the delay. So, a bit of background drift that was mentioned already, but we have a particular history, which also is telling about of our relationship with academia and with our university. Rotterdam University is well known for economics and business school. And I'll come back to it, but it's a very let's say a monocultural university, which is very not only business oriented but also disciplinary and let's say normal science. 20 years ago, we started within a faculty, the School of Social Sciences. And in 2011, we were more or less kicked out of our faculty for being too normative and too radical. Basically, because our mission is as academics to contribute to just sustainability transitions. And a lot of academic colleagues think that that's normative or unscientific. And they are in a way right. It is not according to the dominant values of academia. The DIT, the Design Impact Transition, it's a platform, a strategic experiment. I'll explain a bit later, but it tries to transform this regime. The origin of transition thinking and transition management or transition approaches is the urgency that we feel with issues that threaten our future, be it climate and ecological or social. It's well known, obviously, so I'm not going to lecture you on climate and biodiversity problems. But the core question we as transition researchers ask is, how can it be that all the knowledge that we develop is not translated in adequate action? Something is wrong with our science policy regime or context. And the way to start to understand it, to do so, we use this concept of regime. It's an interesting academic context, but because it's used in different ways in different disciplines. For us, it refers to the dominant culture, structures, and practices that people develop over time in a specific environment. So it can be an organization, it can be a neighborhood, it can be a sector. And what people do is they develop shared ideas, words, discourse. They develop all sorts of organizational structures, incentives, regulations, networks, and they develop certain routines. And Anthony Giddens, the sociologist, developed this concept of structuration. That's a bit behind it. It's basically the idea that we develop context together that makes our life easy, but by living our lives, we also reinforce that context. So the mobility regime, for example, in which cars are very dominant. So we build roads and factories to produce cars, and we incentivize people to buy cars, which means that we have traffic jams and people looking for parking places. So we develop departments and research units to study traffic behavior and to build more roads and more parking places, or to make more efficient use of roads. So regime is basically what makes a society, but it's also the start to think about path dependency and to reflect on the question, why aren't we changing course in a more fundamental way? So we have to understand inertia first before we can start to understand transition. Transition then is basically a fundamental change of a regime over time. Historically, in societal systems, these transitions take 1 or 2 generations to become visible. And historians in our network would say you can only see a transition in hindsight. And the basic idea is a transition is a pattern where society changes, actors or people within the regime for a long time can get away with optimization, making things more efficient. Then more and more people start to feel it's not working out. We have to do something else, but they can't escape the structure. And then inevitably we will, if something is unsustainable, we will enter a period of more disruptive, chaotic change. And in the end, looking back on historic transitions, you will always reach a new equilibrium, which is dynamic, of course, and things disappear. The positive side that a lot of people like, of course, is from the bottom left upward, is that very early on, people will already start to do something else which doesn't fit in the current regime because they feel it's unsustainable. So they start to become vegetarian in the 90s or buy solar panels in the 2000s. So the early adopters or the people that have been doing transdisciplinarity, action research, sustainability science for decades or even longer. And the transition management thought is to look at society as an organism and basically as people, as part of nature, and we individuals are connected. And we learn, we exchange, we experiment, we connect. So in the end, transitions are an organic process where people, more and more people, influence each other, develop new discourse, develop new structures, and ultimately transform a historical regime. So if we know that, or if we understand transitions as an organic process, it also means we need a different type of governance or strategy, much more a transformative network strategy. So the principles here is basically understand the regime you're part of, the dynamics, have sort of a vision or an idea about desired transition, and then in a backcasting mode, recognize where people are already doing it, and bring them together and link them, and then see the now as purely experimental and learning by doing. So in a way, that's why I started with complimenting you for the alliance. Don't know if alliance is the right term, but at least I see you as sort of a connection, connected web of transformative academics. So what we do at Drift, I won't dwell on it, but is apply this kind of logic in practice. So we work in a lot of societal domains, from healthcare and finance to energy and water and mobility, at the national and local level. And we always work with individuals, professionals that are working in those domains, to try to make sense of their regime, the dynamics, and try to push towards the next phase. Basically trying to accelerate desired dynamics, which also include breakdown. And I think before I go to dit, the main thing that we want is, or the only thing that we should want, is to focus all our effort on achieving an economic system that is beneficial for biodiversity and people, which also includes a lot of phase out, by the way. So now the design impact transition platform, we had different names for it, but in the end our board couldn't agree, and all the deans were complicating things. So I was able to force or to put in this name to also be a bit annoying, because in Dutch dit means this, which is very confusing for them. So the idea behind the platform is that we can also apply this transition perspective on academia, and that the dominant science policy model is one of linear knowledge transfer and specialization, which is reflected in university structures, in funding structures, in internal cultures. So academics typically are in an individual competition with each other for grants and publications and promotion, and there's all sorts of institutional incentives to stimulate that. There's sort of a dominant idea that the universities and academics should create objective knowledge, that will then be given to policymakers or whoever, and they will make their normative decisions with it. Our feeling, also building on all those years of experimentation and conversations about transdisciplinarity and sustainability science, is that there is no such thing as objectivity when it comes to at least the social sciences. And then I include economics and engineering, and that for sustainability transitions, which are not there, they are something that we have to invent while doing. We need a form of engaged co-creative research in which in research and education, academia is part of the societal process of change. And this has huge implications for culture, structures, and practices. So we formulated a couple of hypotheses that more and more people see that this regime is not future-proof, that we see all sorts of alternatives, engaged research, action research, citizen science, funders are moving in a different direction, and we also see the context change. Society is asking for a new role of academia. And the desired transition is that we become much more transdisciplinary, and that the disciplines or interdisciplinarity is a part of that, rather than we are multi or perhaps interdisciplinary, and on the fringe we do some transdisciplinarity. And maybe we can discuss transdisciplinarity definitions later on, but I hope you get an idea from what I'm presenting. So we apply this transition management logic to the university and say, okay, there must be people already more than us already thinking about transforming education research and the way that we engage stakeholders or we collaborate. We have our hypothesis, we have a sort of a sense of direction. So let's try to create something that connects those individuals already involved or interested or open to it, and then take initiatives that tell us more about the transition. We have a 4-year program. We're in the last year, and we have sort of an emerging agenda. And the first year, our motto was building the boat while sailing it. Basically trying to think, okay, how do we start a transformative initiative in the university? We had some ideas, also building on the experiences of Drift. We need networked academics, so we need dual positions. We also need other functionalities than academics, so we need designers, facilitators, moderators. We need to start to think about concrete experiments for new education or new types of research, but we really like an experimental year. The second year was much more about sort of, we had developed the platform and a group of academics. I will explain in a bit, and it was much more on engaging the university and the interested people, the second ring, you could say, in imagining the future university and taking them along in this narrative. And this year we are coming closer to institutionalization. So our motto now is dancing with the deans. I don't know if we really go dancing. It's sort of our hope, maybe. It's not a nice thing, but someone has to do it. But it's more of a metaphor where ultimately our goal is a bit to Trojan horse the regime, as we said. Ultimately, we want to become regime, you could say. So very quickly, what do we mean with transformation in these 3 dimensions? So what we did is, with a whole network of individuals, some academics, some educators, some let's say these other functionalities, not really support, but we organized all sorts of activities to research our own regime. We did interviews, workshops, working papers. For example, on education, it showed that there's all sorts of institutional incentives that are financial or are organizational, that disincentivize collaboration and exchange, but also keep a more linear traditional education model in place. So we try to identify that, and we're now coming to a moment where we have a lot of input, but also an idea what should be the design principles for an institutional environment that's actually supportive of transformative education, as we call it. And one of the experiments is that we developed a new master program, which is based on transformative learning. So the curve you see in the middle of the graph is basically the emotional roller coaster the students go through. And then the upper side is the knowledge part. So the course is about transition, thinking, and doing, basically. So it's content and it's lectures and writing and more traditional, you could say. And the bottom part is the reflexivity tracks, which are also more qualitatively assessed. And it's basically where students reflect on what they learn, on their emotions, and then the whole program is based on capacities: think, connect, act, reflect. Won't dwell on it. If you have questions, I can answer them. That are integrally tested in the graduation projects, which are interventions. So basically, they don't graduate on a thesis, but on doing something for which obviously they have made an analysis, formulated a hypothesis, worked with stakeholders, and then done a workshop or event or a protest or published a pamphlet, or they're now working to it. So it's exciting to see what kind of things they come with, because this is the first year is running now. So that's on the content side, it's sort of based on a new idea of education, but the backside of it is that we also developed it based on a new financial and collaboration model. So it's modular. It brings together different academics and groups from the campus, from schools, but also from entities like Drift. And it's based on one transparent financial model. We got this accredited through our national agency, but the university still finds it very problematic because it doesn't fit, but it still has to run. So it creates a lot of discomfort. Same, you could say, with the transformative engagement. The way collaboration works at our university is very much actor-based. So we have a lot of collaboration agreements, and then high-level officials, they sign all these nice plates, and you get a picture. But the collaboration is very linear and institutional. At the same time, we also have a lot of engagement from industry in our economics or business school. There's a lot of controversy about fossil interests. Shell, for example, is quite visible in the curriculum on recruitment days. And people find it normative to question it, some at least. At the same time, it's also obvious that there's a choice behind it. So what we see, and that's more the transdisciplinarity, is that you need a new kind of collaboration. Sorry for the slide, something messed up here, but you need much more a designed engagement based on ethics or a mission, like justice and sustainability, and then a more selective engagement where you try to work towards transformative impact or impact on the transition. So we've had a number of things like sustainability dialogues across campus on fossil relations, but also on the future of disciplines. And we're doing a number of transition workshops. I'm going to speed up to allow for questions. On the research side, one interesting thing we did is 5-6 colleagues, one Austrian colleague, by the way, that was visiting, did interviews with colleagues, trying to understand what incentivizes or disincentivizes them to become more action-oriented. And a lot of it has to do with the recognition and reward, unfamiliarity with other methods. They don't know how to do it. So he said we need a new kind of institutional environment to get promoted, but also to get support. We need training. We need another type of ethics, a judgment for transdisciplinarity. So we try to create publications, but also a conversation around transformative research and and transdisciplinarity, and how can we ensure its quality? How can we basically develop different kind of quality standards? On the website, there's a lot of publications you can find. I think we that's all I have to present. So I'm going to switch back to the screen. Where we are now in this experiment is in a very exciting phase, because we're moving towards the end of the process, and now finally through the experimentation got into conversations about institutional change at the level of the whole university. In our case, one of the schools that might be transformed into basically the DIT platform, or that our principles and ideas will be used to transform one of the schools, to experiment with basically a permanent infrastructure for transdisciplinarity, which is a whole thing in itself, because we have a law in the Netherlands on higher education, and you can only have faculties or schools by law. So we are trying to redefine something that's set in stone. And obviously, you're all in universities, you know the politics. So we have other deans. They are there to defend the interests of schools or disciplines. So it's completely political. But it's a very interesting journey, and I hope it provided some recognition for you, but maybe also some points that were novel and that raised some questions. So thanks for listening in. I hope it came across. Looking forward to see you whether it resonates or raises questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Derk, a lot for your inputs. And yeah, floor is open for questions and ideas.
I can start. You showed this very classical picture of transition where the regime is destabilizing and the niches coming up. And you said that the current regime already shows some signs of destabilization. And I wondered if we, and I see us as change agents, if we are somehow agents also of promoting chaos, according to your slides. And I wonder how this fits with, at the same time, creating a positive image of the future.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I showed this graph, but it's without a timeline, and that's deliberately so, because it's very subjective where you are in a transition and how you experience it. And I think a lot of people that see the positives of transition or see it as inevitable, we cannot go on like this indefinitely. I mean, that's a certainty that I've never really questioned, but I see a lot of people that have never considered it even. And then if you look at sustainability issues, or if you are like a change agent, you think it's inevitable or desirable to change, and you encounter people that are just doing their job, you create chaos for them, or you create your own resistance almost. So in that sense, yes, we're agents of chaos. In a way, we also at Drift deliberately use it to create a confusion. That's often the first phase of real learning. At the same time, we see now in Dutch society that it's also very unpredictable and complex, and indeed unmanageable. So we have a huge populist sort of revolt going on, and the farmers' protests are part of that, and the conspiracy theories after COVID, and then so there's a lot of anger in society with the elite or with the system. I sympathize with that, because as change agents, we also want to change the system, but somehow forces within the existing socio-economic order and political order are able to catalyze the anger in society, so that we get conservative political forces that basically protect the same system that people are angry at. I don't know if you're still with me, but so for us, it's really also a question that we have to ask ourselves all the time as action-oriented researchers. What are we doing? What are we messing with? At the same time, we also have to recognize that we're only very small parts of a much bigger chaotic whole. So we shouldn't overestimate ourselves in that sense. But yeah, reflexivity is a very good trait of change agents.
Other questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, yes, I do.
But coming back to that slide we just discussed, would you see the chance or the threat, however you might want to put it, that trying to foster positive change helps the current system to sustain? You know, because you implement small changes that come through innovation and that you experimented on, but in giving that to the current system, you actually prolong its life rather than having it crash.
Yes,
Do you see a threat to that?
Yeah, very much so. That's something that I ask myself all the time, which is also why I responded a bit on my resume summary, because this is actually also what we critique sustainability for. So the whole sustainability discourse in a way became about how can we extend the lifetime of what we already have. But it's also happening in the Netherlands with the transitions discourse. It's like we talk about transition washing. You also point at something that's more fundamental, that you never know whether something is actually transformative unless you're a future historian. So we now talk about transitions, but we have no idea whether we can call them transitions. We can also say, so far, we're still stuck. And we're still seeing increase of emissions and decrease of biodiversity and more cars, and I don't know. I think so. Our hypothesis is constantly that there are these building pressures that push regimes out of equilibrium, and that we can increase the chances of transformative impact of alternatives. And that's something that we only can reflect on by doing. So the whole work on transformative social innovation and transformative potential is all about, they call it reflexive monitoring, but it's basically the mindset with which we innovate. And that's a very subjective a question. For example, the mobility transition is the shift to electric cars a transition or not? My technological transition colleagues would say yes. Look what it did to the car industry, and you need a whole new infrastructure, new protocols, new research departments, the economics of mobility change, our driving habits change. But I say it's a technological transition and it's not a sustainability transition. We need as little cars as possible. So we need a mobility transition and not a technical change in cars, because then we're still stuck in a traffic jam and using up all these resources. So I think it's in this process where we are in as a society now that us sustainability academics have to continuously ask these kind of questions and increase the chances that in transforming we seize as much of the potential that is there as possible. And we have ask these questions also to ourselves.
Okay. Yeah, Maria.
I'm not sure if I can form a question, but I try and to start with a comment. I detect. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fine. I detect a huge gap between change agents like we are, or scientists or activists like you are, who say we need to change the academic system, we need to change the whole economic system, etc., etc. And from my daily work, I'm a sustainability manager at the university, and from my daily work, I know that it's so difficult to convince people. People do not see the need to change the system. I would say that the majority of my colleagues do not see the necessity. And I wonder, even if universities would say, we start the process of transforming now, we want to do it, we start a huge change, how can we manage within, I don't know, a couple of years? So maybe this would be the question. Because people, that's the point. I think people don't see the necessity to change.
No, so a couple of things to say about it. One is not everybody has to change in a forced way or in a conscious way. So transitions historically is just a change of context to which people adapt. Most people. So that's the first. So don't think about everybody needs to participate. Focus on it. A transition is a change in context. Second, yes, I have a normative idea about where transitions should go, but I try to be much more descriptive about the inevitability of transitions. So we are in an academic system and a context that is already transforming. If you see where research funders are going, and if you see the discourse about the role of academia, if you see what popular universities are doing, where the most advanced things are happening. So, I mean, it is transforming, and that will even mean that in departments where nothing much might seem to happen, there will always be individuals that are thinking, well, maybe we should do something else, or that are maybe doing a bit more experimentation, or they might not be as vocal as I am about it. But and that brings me to the most practical thing. What we have difficulty with as academics is finding people in the organization that we can align with. Because my experience in the platform is that we come up with all sorts of ideas and conversations, and now people on the organizational side, without coming to us, they start to organize conferences on financing and transdisciplinarity. And they do it on the organizational side, or they start sustainability working groups for greening the campus without involving academics. Or they start the strategy process where they put all the bureaucrats in the conversation, while we also have a lot of academics that have experience with strategy development. Or so one of the things that we try in the platform is bring that closer together. And it's not about that you all shout everything needs to transform. It's much more about how do you connect your daily practice that is transformative in a way that it has a wider system impact. Not sure if it was completely clear.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think everybody's nodding.
Right. So we're in the middle of the process already, and you're right. There are a lot of initiatives going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
foster them.
One of the characteristics of this linear modernistic society development model is that we always talk about something that needs to happen, and that we're going to develop a plan for it, and thereby we don't realize that it's actually we're in the middle of it. So you are now already this is part of the transition, that you are coming together and having this conversation. Yeah, so that's so. If you go out walking or reflecting or strategizing, that is the transition. So the question I want to give you for the afternoon is, how do you make this interaction that you are having now meaningful for the transformation of your own institutes, but also of the academic system at large?
One question, if you see a whole country, not only a university, what is the context that has to change so that you have a change in the whole country?
Yeah, that's so we always said we apply this transition perspective on societal subsystems, because within a sector or a complex organization or an area, you can identify a regime. Obviously, you can also do it at a country level, but then it becomes so diffuse. And then my colleague Johan Schot says you have to take a time frame of 150 years. So it's and then it becomes really speculative. At the same time, the Netherlands, it has for example, and you can translate it to Austria. It has a particular history. It has a particular geography. That it has certain resources that have led to a specific economic structure. We have like a huge airport, much bigger than our country needs. We have huge industry, much bigger than our country can hold. We have a huge farming system. It's completely killing our environment. So I can describe this regime. And there are a couple of efforts going on to come up with visions for the transition of the Netherlands, which are all about shifting to an economy where we restore biodiversity, which is about water resilience and ecological resilience, and about social inclusivity. And finally, also at the regime level, people are discussing now things like broad welfare, or maybe we have some sectors in the economy like logistics and slaughterhouses and growing tulips with natural gas and flying them to Kenya or I don't know, all over the world, and 2 weeks later they're in the trash. So we finally start to talk that we have sectors in the economy that should be maybe phased out. So you can apply this logic to a country, but it becomes yes, very diffuse. Who are you talking about, and on what time scale? Mm-hmm. And we often treat it as part of the landscape to understand how specific regimes, like our university, is intertwined with the post-war history of our country.
Mm-hmm. All right. One last question. I think you have to leave also, right?
At a certain moment, yeah. But I have
Yeah.
12 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, all right, perfect.
For me, the question about who are the responsible people to make changes. If you have maybe some recommendations, because to me it comes to my mind that you have sometimes the challenge that you have a problem. You convince people that this would be a good solution to solve it. Let's say we have to change our curricula because the competences of the future should be like this or that. And everybody says, yes, we have to. But then when it comes to the point to change it, nobody wants to change anything.
No.
And then you have to, then you really feel, oh my God, everybody understood the problem. Everybody wanted to change, but they don't do it. Who is the responsible person? What do you have to do then at that point when the convincement already was there, that everybody thought, yes, we have to change?
So for me, it is an example of the normal, but maybe not always the most productive way of thinking. Everybody agrees, and you even have a solution, and then somebody needs to implement it. That's not how it works. So everybody agrees, but people that have been trained and conditioned and rewarded to just do it as it has always been done, if they agree, that means that they feel that they're not getting happy from it anymore, or that it's not maybe working, but they have no idea how to do it differently. Which is like these interviews we had with colleagues in the university. They feel they're in a rat race, and they produce trivial papers that nobody reads, or something like that. But they agree, but they cannot change the system, and they don't know how to escape. So what we would say, there are no solutions. It's a process. Where are people already doing it, and what can we learn from how they do it, and how can we work together to try to understand what kind of incentives are needed, or what kind of support are needed. And if we then involve those colleagues that all say, oh, we want change, if you involve them in understanding those transformative practices, they will themselves think, oh, but then next time I write something different in my subsidy application, or if I am in a revision of my course, I might invite this colleague to help me think about maybe introducing a transformative learning concept. Or so let go of the idea that someone somewhere needs to solve it, and accept that there is an organic process going on that you can stimulate or incentivize or help by connecting people, that will ultimately take us to a transformed university.
I think a possible solution might be to communicate that change is inevitable, and the people that hold power now will lose power anyway. Because this is, if you go to that chaos phase, you can be pretty sure that you will not come up as the head again on the other side. So any leader would have an incentive to, prolong the status quo. But if we are able to tell them, you are going to come up on the other side in a fair position if you are able to transform, or if you go to that transformation process yourself actively, that might be better than to just expect people to undermine their own position, wealth, and power just for the sake of humanity from the start.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, because you also make them aware that they might lose their position. And a lot of what I experience in the way that I approach things is that people explicitly or implicitly feel that our enthusiasm about change is also a value judgment about how they do their job. And it basically means that we expect them to do something different, and nobody likes to do things different or to change, or and especially if you hold power and your job is to protect the status quo. Yeah. So, but it's a matter. But indeed, what we try to do is make the more scientific, science and arguments based, more descriptive argument that inevitably systemic and also more shockwise change is inevitable. And we can point at climate change and biodiversity. We can point at changes in the context, geopolitics, or digitalization, or an aging population. Or, I mean, you cannot ignore that, and that is going to affect the way our systems work or are historically designed. And add to that individuals are always able to escape from the regime and come up with new ways. So it's not a matter of if you want to change or not. This is just an evolutionary dynamic that is happening to us. And the question is, how do we relate to it? Do we anticipate it, embrace it, play into it, be part of it, or try to resist it as long as possible? So that is the kind of question that we pose to people that are more in an institutional position, hoping that they will then start to reflect and go through a more personal transition, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
All right. Thank you, Derk, so much for your input and answering the question and yeah, being here with us. I think we'll close this round now.
Yeah.
Is it okay if people contact you if they have further questions?
Yes, I will share I will send you the slides, and then you can distribute them.
Perfect. Thank
Let
you.
me know if there are follow-up questions. Thanks for having me, and have a very good strategic, transformative meeting.
Thank you so much for joining.
Bye.
Okay.
good discussion.
Ich habe einen Vorschlag, und zwar haben wir das ein bisschen anders geplant, aber ich habe das Gefühl, es wäre echt ganz gut. Machen wir 10 Minuten Pause, treffen uns nochmal da, kurze